I think for me, I mean, I've had 3 careers, really. I started out actually music, as we'll probably talk about, then went into academia, which I still do, and then the television, radio, live shows. But I think across all of them, I think it's doing a good job, finding the way to do a good job. And for me, I find it's attention to detail. I found that in all those professions, nothing is easy. It requires practice, and it requires attention to detail, and it requires you to also, I think, for me, take responsibility for getting it right. And so those are without rambling on for 50 minutes, that would be my definition.
Well, let's dive into a few of those then. We'll start with the first one you mentioned, which is kind of the getting good at something. There's that great phrase, isn't there? How good you're willing to be at something depends how long you're happy to be bad for.
Yeah.
That makes sense to you?
Absolutely. And I think it's about practice, isn't it? I often say, because I think it was one of the first times I'd been on any chat show. I think with Jonathan Ross, I just started to get well known. And I said, with my exam results, I did well in physics, but I got a D in maths. And everyone was surprised, you got a D in maths. And it's because I didn't practice hard enough. And I said at the time, and I strongly believe it's true, that very few people are naturally great at something. I'm certainly not. And I suspect most people you've had on this podcast, there's the odd Mozart or Messi or something like that. But most people, I think, have maybe a bit of an aptitude for something, but it's mainly about practice. And I found that with maths, definitely. I found it with music, and I found it with making TV programs as well.
So do you remember when you first understood that?
Probably when I got a D in maths, actually. I mean, honestly, it was...
Was it unexpected?
Well, I joined a band beforehand, so I didn't think I was actually going to need it. It was at A-level, and I didn't think I was going to go that route. I thought I was going to be a musician, so I'd sort of slightly lost interest. But I think it probably was. I noticed that although I'd been okay at school, I could do things, and I could do physics. I think that was the first time where I realised that you actually have to put work in most, if not all, the things that you do in order to get to a really high standard or high enough standard.
No, I've heard you interviewed before, Brian, where you've said that kind of message, I imagine, was being drummed into you by your parents, and now you're the father of a 14-year-old son. How do you get kids to understand that you've got to put the effort in to get good at it without having to go through that bitter experience of getting a D?
I'm not sure if you can. I mean, my experience is that if you're lucky, your kids will find something they like doing. And actually, with my son, he's playing guitar. So he the moment he started playing guitar, he's been practicing over and over again. He picks it up and he practices, and he's getting good at it. And so that wasn't me. I think most parents will say you can't force your children to be interested in something. It just doesn't work, right? Very rarely. But you can hopefully give them the encouragement when they find the thing that they're interested in. And I hope then that he's learning a more general lesson, which is actually the more you practice and the more work you put in, the more enjoyable it is. The more you enjoy it, the better you get at it, the more you enjoy it, and there's a virtuous circle. And that I really think that applies to virtually everything that we do in life. But I think you have to find it yourself.
And I'm so pleased you've mentioned luck, because people very rarely talk about it, particularly successful people. They very rarely say, well, I kind of got lucky. And we're very aware on this podcast of survivorship bias. Successful people telling everyone else how they've done it, thinking that it's easy because it was easy for them.
Yeah.
But I'd love to find out a bit more about your relationship with luck, but also the fact that you clearly understood from a young age, luck was there, but without the hard work, then that luck was eventually going to run out.
Yeah, if I've got one tip, and as you said, it's so boring to listen to people who've been lucky describe how that it wasn't luck. it was all my doing. And you're absolutely right. For me, it's about opportunities. If you're fortunate, and I suppose you could argue you can try and put yourself in the right position and things like that. But broadly speaking, if you're lucky, then you'll get a few opportunities. And then it's having that, I think, that knowing that you're not just going to sail through then. You've actually got to do the work to try and seize that opportunity. Sometimes it'll go wrong and sometimes it won't. But that's what I would say. That's what I've learned. Partly because I've had at least 3 different careers. So I've been through it really 3 times thinking, how do I've been lucky, and I want to do this. So what do I have to do now?
Could you explain your process then to people of how you go from that moment where you make a decision that you're going to change career maybe to working out how you're going to not just be okay at it, but be great at it or be successful at it? What do you go through?
Yeah, I mean, with the caveat that you can never, I don't think you can plan to be great and successful, can you? But you try and...
You can plan to do your best, right?
You try and have a go, give it a go. And a good example, I think, for me was with physics. So I'd been in music. So I was 23 years old, I think, when I went back to university. And of course, I was behind those people. Most of the people in my year were 18 and they just come through A-levels. And they'd done probably better than me in the exams initially because they'd all got better grades. But also they were fresh and they'd just come out of school. And I'd had 5 years being in a rock band. Yeah. So I realised that I had to work really hard, particularly in maths, which I didn't have and don't have a natural aptitude for, if indeed anyone does, right? So I think the key thing for me is I realised, and I still think it's very important, that I had to take responsibility for my own success or failure, right? So, and it really matters in academia at every level. Ultimately, and I say this, I teach, right, at the University of Manchester, and I say it to the first years, you actually know, you don't need to do an exam to know whether you understand something, actually. You know in your deep down, you know whether you understand something or not. And if you don't, then go and understand it. And we, the lecturers, everyone, the teachers, whoever it is, we're here to help. You come, but it probably, in my case, usually, if I don't get something, it comes from reading about 3 different textbooks and sitting there and thinking. And sometimes it can take a couple of days, and sometimes it can take weeks, and sometimes it can take months. Sometimes I never understand it, right? But it's going through that. For me, it's really important to take responsibility for your own, in this case, understanding something, being able to understand some bit of physics. But it could be, running fast. It could be playing football well. It could be playing the keyboards well. Ultimately, I don't think anyone can teach you to be great.
Are born scientists. They're always turning over rocks and plucking petals off of flowers. They're always doing things that, by and large, are destructive. And no, that's what exploration kind of is. If you take stuff apart, whether or not you know how to put it back together. This is what kids do. An adult scientist is a kid who never grew up. That's what an adult scientist does. So what happens at home is the kid reaches in the refrigerator, pulls out an egg and starts juggling it. What's the first thing you do as a parent? Stop playing with the egg. It could break. Put it back. Excuse me, this is an experiment in the material strength of let the kid find out that when it drops, it breaks. This is a physics experiment rapidly turned into a biology experiment, okay? The yolk oozes out. You say, hey, that becomes a chickie one day, okay? Wait, how does this gooey oat become a chicken? Well, that's biology. Check that out. And what did the egg cost you? 20 cents? President of Harvard once said, if you think education is expensive, you should try the cost of ignorance. So we don't have enough parents who understand or know how to value the inquisitive nature of their own kids because they want to keep order in their household. Kids go into the kitchen and pull out all the pots and pans and start banging on them. What's the first thing you say as a parent? Stop making all that noise. Stop the racket. You're getting the pots and pans dirty. You just squashed an entire experiment in acoustics. So, I'm not worried about kids. People say, what can I do to get my kids interested in science? They're already interested in science. You're the one who's the problem. Almost my entire professional energy is focused on adults because they outnumber kids. They vote. They run the world. They wield opportunities. Kids will be fine.
Control over those coastlines. Became part of the British Empire. Hegemony at its finest.
Wow.
On the premise that he's observing something about the universe, but there was a tandem role that he played.
I did not know they knew that much about the cycles of the planets, that they could be there. They knew accurately that they could be in
Part
the
of the
ocean.
motivation of knowing any of this was navigation around the globe. Was navigation. How are you going to know where you are on Earth? You can get your latitude. That's just the altitude, the height of Polaris, the North Star above the horizon. You measure that at night. You can wait that long. Where do you know where you are in longitude? Ships would be shipwrecked. Millions of dollars worth of commerce would be at the bottom of the ocean because they didn't know where a coastline was. And the only way you can measure coastline is if you have good navigational tools and tactics, which involves an accurate chronometer, a timekeeping device for your, and knowing what the sun, moon, and stars are doing in your sky. So the astronomer in that day was crucial to the mapping of the Earth. And who's mapping Earth? Is it just geologists for fun? No, it is nations wielding power over regions beyond their own coastlines. Wow. And I have a quote here. That's where this quote comes from. I got a guy from 1757, James Ferguson. 1757. Here's his quote. Of all the sciences cultivated by mankind, astronomy is acknowledged to be, and undoubtedly is, the most sublime, the most interesting, and the most useful. For by knowledge derived from this science, not only the bulk of the earth is discovered, but our very faculties are enlarged with the grandeur of the ideas it conveys, our minds exalted above their low, contracted prejudices.
Whoa. That's
I
pretty
got to drop a
powerful.
mic on that. Here we go.
Boom.
Drop that mic. So, notice he lists
the popularity of science fiction like Star Trek is because this is a form of science with which people feel safe. But an understanding of science fact would lay their fears to rest much better. What can be done to harness this fascination with science and give people the background they need to make informed decisions on subjects like the greenhouse effect, nuclear weapons, or genetic engineering? The basis must be what is taught in schools. But school science is often presented in a dry and uninteresting manner. When I wrote a brief history, I was advised that each equation I included would have the sales. I included one, Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Perhaps I would have sold twice as many copies without it. Scientists and engineers tend to express their ideas by equations because they need to know the precise value of quantities. But for most people, a qualitative, rather than quantitative, understanding is sufficient. This can be conveyed by words and diagrams without the need for complicated equations. School science can provide the basic framework. But the rate of progress is now so rapid that there are always new developments that have occurred since one was at school or university. Popular science books and articles can help to put across these new developments. But only a small proportion of the population reads even the most successful book. Television is one way to reach a truly mass audience. But television is communication one way only. Now, with the internet, people can answer back and interact. In a way, the internet connects us all together, like the neurons in a giant brain. With such an IQ, what won't we be capable of? So remember to look up at the stars and not down at your feet. Try to make sense of what you see and wonder about what makes the universe exist. Be curious. And however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at.